I heard the knocking before I even opened my eyes. Bam, bam, bam. It wasn't a polite tap. It was the kind of banging that said someone thinks they own you. I rolled out of bed, pulled on a t-shirt, and padded barefoot toward the door. A glance at the clock. 7:02 a.m. On a Saturday. I cracked the door open. There stood Cheryl Williams, a middle-aged woman in pressed khakis and a polo shirt, clutching a clipboard like it was a badge of honor. Her lipstick was too bright for the hour. Her expression was even louder. "Mr. Ellison," she barked, "you're in violation of HoA Code Section 14B. I blinked. "Good morning to you too." She jabbed the clipboard toward the driveway, then gestured wildly at the water beyond. My boat, a modest 20-foot fishing vessel, was tied neatly to my own dock. Nothing new. I'd lived here 3 years, boating nearly every weekend. You can't keep that eyesore docked there. It obstructs the aesthetic view of the lake. It's unauthorized and unsightly. I leaned against the doorframe, trying to keep my cool. "Pretty sure my dock's been here longer than you've been on the HoA board." Her nostrils flared. "It doesn't matter. All lakeside property is subject to HoA jurisdiction, and you need to submit an application or face fines. Now, it's worth mentioning, I'm not a man who looks for fights." But something in Cheryl's tone, the entitlement, the arrogance, lit a fuse deep inside me. I smiled, slow and dangerous. "Funny thing about that," I said. "This lake, that dock, they're on my property." Her face tightened. "It's community property," she insisted. "You're part of the HoA. You agreed to abide by its rules." I folded my arms across my chest. "You sure about that? You ever actually read the property deeds?" The way her mouth opened and closed told me she hadn't. "I suggest you do," I said, and shut the door in her stunned face. It took me all of 15 minutes to dig out the paperwork. The original survey map. The deeds. The easement agreements from decades ago. And most importantly, the ownership title clearly stating that not only did I own my plot of land, but the entire stretch of shoreline and the lake itself. It was a strange historical fluke. Back in the 1950s, a private rancher built the lake as part of an irrigation project. When the land was parceled off into residential lots, the lake stayed tied to one parcel, now mine. No HoA rights. No community access. Just private land. I poured a mug of coffee, sat on the porch, and watched Cheryl storm around the edge of the lake, still on the warpath. She must have knocked on 3 other doors before noon, rallying her troops. By midday, I had 3 more HoA members knocking, this time with printed copies of HoA regulations in hand, highlighted in neon yellow. They quoted paragraphs at me about common resources and shared aesthetics. They talked about setting a precedent and protecting property values. I listened politely. Then I showed them the deed. Every single one of them turned pale when they saw it. It was like watching kids realize the principal heard their entire plan to prank the school. "You own the whole lake." Greg Sims, the HoA vice president, croaked. "Sure do," I said cheerfully. "And the shoreline up to 20 feet past the high water mark." But that can't be." Cheryl sputtered. "Nobody told us." I shrugged. "Maybe you should have read the public records before you started handing out fines." I walked them down to the dock, pointed at the private property markers that had been there since before I bought the place. Faded, sure, but legal. By sunset, I'd ordered 3 new metal signs and a fresh batch of boundary markers. It was time everyone remembered whose water they were splashing in. The next day they came back. This time with clipboards, legal pads, and strained smiles. They tried a new tactic, reasonableness. "We're just trying to keep the peace," Greg said. His voice was oily, the kind of tone used by used car salesmen and politicians. "Maybe we can come to some sort of agreement." "Like what?" I asked, crossing my arms. "Maybe you grant the HoA permanent access rights," he said. "In exchange, we'll waive the fine for the dock and we'll even pay for landscaping upgrades around your property." Cheryl nodded stiffly. "It would be good for the community." I tilted my head. "You're offering to spend HoA funds, the community's money, To bribe me into giving you free rights to my private lake?" They both flinched. "That's one way to put it," Greg muttered. "Here's my counteroffer," I said, smiling wide. "You get off my land. And you stay off." I handed them each a formal notice, a simple sheet printed with bold black letters. Notice of private ownership. No trespassing without written consent. They didn't argue after that. They slunk back to their SUVs like raccoons caught raiding the garbage. By Monday morning, shiny new private property signs dotted the shoreline every 50 feet. I even paid extra to have them bolted into concrete bases. Let them try to argue with that. The fallout hit faster than I expected. At first, it was just whispers. Then it became open shouting matches on Nextdoor and Facebook groups. "Why can't we fish anymore? Who gave Cheryl the right to negotiate access? I thought the HO owned the lake." One mom posted a tearful video saying her son's birthday party was ruined because they couldn't kayak on their lake anymore. A retiree claimed his entire reason for moving to Pine Ridge Estates was the promised lake privileges. By Wednesday, the HOA hosted an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. It was standing room only. People overflowed onto the lawn. I sat in the back row, arms folded, sipping a soda. Cheryl stood at the podium, red-faced and sweating, trying to explain the misunderstanding. "Clearly," she said, voice cracking, "there was a historical error in the subdivision of parcels, and while the HOA has traditionally treated the lake as a shared asset, legally speaking, it's owned by Mr. Ellison." The uproar drowned her out. People shouted about dues increases, hidden financial reports, lack of transparency. One guy in cargo shorts yelled, "What else are you lying about, Cheryl?" I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Greg tried to calm the crowd, suggesting that temporary negotiations might restore access. He even floated the idea of seizing an easement through eminent domain. I stood up. "Good luck with that," I said, holding up my deed again. "Private recreational lakes are exempt from eminent domain unless it's for urgent public infrastructure. Read the statutes." Dead silence. Then someone clapped. Then another. Pretty soon, half the room was cheering. Cheryl fled the podium like a whipped dog. The next week, things got nastier. Workers in unmarked trucks showed up one morning, hauling fencing materials. They started unloading posts and rolled up chain link along the far shore, my land. I marched down there, phone recording in hand. "Who hired you?" I asked. One guy shrugged. "Got a work order from the Pine Ridge Estates HOA." "You got a permit?" He looked confused. "You got permission from the landowner?" He looked at the lake, then back at me. "Aren't you the landowner?" "Yup," I said. "And I'm telling you right now, pack it up, or I'm calling the sheriff." The workers didn't argue. They loaded their supplies and left, muttering about crazy rich people. I didn't stop there. I filed a formal trespassing complaint against the HOA with the county sheriff's department. I should have known they wouldn't quit that easily. By Friday, a new trick was already brewing. A folded flyer showed up in my mailbox, anonymous but obvious in its intent. Black text screamed across the top. "Save our lake." Below that, a petition form. The HOA was gathering signatures to demand that the county reclassify the lake as a public utility. If they got enough residents to back it, they claimed they could pressure the county board into eminent domain proceedings, even though legally they didn't have a snowball's chance in July. It was pure propaganda, preying on neighbors' anger and ignorance. And it was smart, evil but smart. They were framing me as the villain, the selfish landowner, the man who stole the lake. I stood in my kitchen, the flyer crumpled in my fist, staring out at the water that had always been peaceful, serene, mine. Not anymore. Now it was a battlefield. That night, I sat down at my computer and drafted a letter of my own. Professional. I attached copies of the deed, the historical documents, and a legal opinion I'd commissioned from a property attorney. Then I printed 200 copies. The next morning, I walked the neighborhood myself. Mailbox by mailbox. Porch by porch. I smiled politely when doors opened. I shook hands. I explained, carefully, patiently, what was really happening. Some listened. Some didn't. But I saw the flickers of doubt. The anger turning inward, against the board, against the people who'd stirred up this mess. By sunset, I knew, they had declared war. But they had no idea how stubborn I could be. The first real blow landed 2 days later. I woke early, an old habit from my army days, and wandered down to the dock with a thermos of coffee. Something was wrong. The air smelled of gasoline. I froze. My boat bobbed crookedly, its lines slashed and barely clinging to the dock. Black scorch marks marred the deck. Someone had poured fuel over the hull, probably planning to torch it, and chickened out at the last minute. I crouched low, heart pounding, scanning the shorelines. No one in sight. It was a message. Not a failed arson, a warning. I snapped photos, bagged a few pieces of the cut rope for fingerprints, and called the sheriff. They took it seriously. A cruiser rolled up within the hour. Deputy Harlan, big guy, broad shoulders, the type who probably moonlighted as a bar bouncer, took my statement. "This is escalation," he said grimly. "You sure you don't want to install cameras?" "I'm sure," I said. "Already ordered them." And I had. 4 wireless high-definition units, motion-activated, with night vision. Rush delivery. I wasn't going to just defend my lake with paperwork anymore. Now it was time to fight smart. By noon, cameras were hidden along the dock, the porch, the tree-line. Watching. Waiting. Let them try something again. They held it under the pretense of a neighborhood watch discussion. In reality, it was a war council. I heard about it from Mrs. Dobbins, my neighbor 2 doors down, a retired schoolteacher with a sharp memory and a sharper tongue. "They're plotting against you," she said, practically gleeful. "Said you're a danger to community unity." I laughed bitterly. "Because I don't want them trespassing?" She leaned in conspiratorially. "They're talking about drafting new bylaws. Zoning complaints. Even trying to have you declared a public nuisance." That one caught me off guard. Public nuisance? Over owning my property. Mrs. Dobbins patted my arm. "Don't you worry. I know a rat when I see one. And Cheryl, she's got rabies." It was funny, when the real trouble starts, you find out who your friends are. And who your enemies really are, too. I decided not to crash their little meeting. No need to. I had a better plan. I sent an email, not to the HoA board, but to the entire neighborhood email list they'd stupidly left public. Subject line, legal status of lake ownership, facts versus fear. In it, I laid out everything, clean and simple. Property deeds. Case law examples. Risks of wrongful HoA action. Potential personal liability for board members if they pursued illegal claims. I hit send. Then I sat back and waited for the wildfire to catch. The call came at 2:17 a.m. "Sheriff's Department. We got a report of a disturbance at your address," the voice said. I swung out of bed, grabbing jeans and boots. What kind of disturbance? Possible vandalism. Officers en route. I didn't need to guess. I jogged down to the dock, flashlight slicing the night. There, half sunk in the reeds, floated 2 plastic lawn chairs, a busted-up folding table, and, incredibly, a giant inflatable flamingo. Someone had thrown a lake party on my shoreline. Without permission. Trash floated everywhere. Beer cans, torn banners, soggy confetti. They'd even set up tiki torches, most of them still smoldering dangerously close to the brush. The squad car arrived, lights off, silent but firm. 2 deputies stepped out. Recognized me immediately. I showed them the footage, crystal-clear images from my new cameras. 3 teenagers, 2 men I recognized from the HoA board, and a woman who looked suspiciously like Cheryl's sister. The deputies didn't hesitate. Trespassing charges. Vandalism. Illegal dumping. They wrote it all up, grim-faced and professional. "You want to press full charges?" Deputy Harlan asked, almost apologetic. I looked at the mess, the beer-soaked grass, the scorched lawn furniture. "Full charges," I said. "Good," he said. "They're not used to being told no." Neither was I. And I sure as hell wasn't about to start now. By Monday, the HoA's desperation had reached new heights. A county notice appeared on my mailbox, Request for review, public access rights investigation. I laughed when I read it. Desperate, pathetic, amateur hour. The HoA had actually petitioned the county planning board to review the lake status, citing community hardship and historical access patterns. It wasn't a formal legal proceeding yet, but it was a step toward trying to force a legal battle. They thought I'd be scared. Instead, I called my lawyer, a mean little man named Carlisle who ate HoA boards for breakfast. "This'll be fun," Carlisle said, practically purring. "I love it when amateurs step into court thinking emotion beats deeds." He had me draft a public statement too, just in case. To whom it may concern. The property known as Pine Ridge Lake is a private, deeded asset under my exclusive ownership. No historical usage or HoA claim alters this. Any attempt to seize or regulate said property without lawful due process will be met with immediate legal action. Simple, cold, bulletproof. Carlisle filed it with the county clerk's office that afternoon. Meanwhile, word leaked that Cheryl and the board members involved in the lake party had been formally cited by law enforcement and would be facing misdemeanor charges. Their petition lost over half its signatures within 48 hours. The tide had turned, and I stood at the center of the lake, in my small boat, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise blaze across the water. My water. My fight. And I wasn't losing either. I expected them to back off after the police citations. Instead, they got sneakier. One morning I woke to find a county vehicle parked outside my house. A clipboard-toting inspector climbed out, looking sheepish. "Got a report of unpermitted construction," he said, tapping the form in his hand. I blinked. "What construction?" He glanced at my perfectly ordinary deck, the same one that had been here for 20 years. "Anonymous complaint said you're building a commercial marina." I laughed, a real, bitter laugh. "You're kidding." He wasn't. He had to file a formal inspection report, even though he could already tell it was baseless. Over the next week, the same game played out again and again. Noise complaints about imaginary parties. Sanitation concerns because of potential lake pollution. Accusations that I was renting boats illegally. Each time, county workers rolled out, wasted their morning, and apologized on their way back to the truck. The message was clear: we'll drown you in red tape. It was supposed to break me, exhaust me, bury me under petty bureaucracy until I gave up. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. I kept a log of every visit, photographed every inspection notice, filed every false report with the sheriff's office as harassment. If they wanted a paper war, I was happy to oblige. And I was building one hell of a case. Funny thing about bullies, push them too far, and even their friends start looking for the exits. By week 3 of their smear campaign, the mood in the neighborhood had shifted. People who used to nod politely now stopped to talk. Some apologized outright. Others asked quiet questions, about the law, about the real story. I kept it simple, polite, firm. No anger, no drama. Just the truth, laid out calmly and patiently. Mrs. Dobbins told me that at the last HoA meeting, the board barely had quorum. Half the seats were empty. "The spell's breaking," she said, grinning. Then came the real blow. An anonymous letter slipped under Cheryl's door. Several neighbors saw it happen. It read, "Resign or be recalled. We didn't sign up for your war." Cheryl's power wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. Without the neighborhood's blind loyalty, she had no army left. Just a sinking ship. And she was the captain chained to the wheel. I didn't gloat. Didn't celebrate. I just kept walking my dock, fishing pole in hand, letting them see me there, solid, stubborn, immovable. The lake was mine. And so was the patience to outlast them all. It happened quietly at first, a ripple, not a roar. 2 board members resigned the same week. Official reasons, personal obligations, and family commitments. Unofficially, they wanted no part of Cheryl's doomed crusade. Without enough board members, the HoA couldn't legally function. No meetings. No petitions. No power. Desperate, Cheryl tried to rally replacements. She cornered people at the grocery store, chased them through the parking lot, even ambushed them at the neighborhood park. Nobody wanted the job. The HoA was radioactive now, a joke, a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, my lawyer filed a formal harassment complaint against Cheryl personally. Civil court. Public records. It named every incident. The fake complaints. The trespassing. The defamation. She was looking at real damages now, thousands of dollars worth if a judge agreed. The lake had become her obsession. And now it was going to cost her everything. One evening, I saw her standing across the cul-de-sac, staring at the water like it had betrayed her. Maybe it had. Because it had never belonged to her. And never would. Cornered rats fight hardest. Cheryl's final move was as desperate as it was stupid. She organized an emergency vote, unofficial, unsanctioned, urging neighbors to voluntarily contribute toward a legal fund to save the lake. I got a copy of the flyer, half a page of lies, thinly veiled threats, and appeals to neighborhood pride. It was laughable, but dangerous too, because a few people were still scared enough, angry enough, to throw good money after bad. I wasn't about to let it grow. I wrote one last letter. Short, sharp, final. Attention residents of Pine Ridge Estates. Any donations solicited under the pretense of saving a legally deeded private property may constitute fraud. Donors could be held liable. Participants could face individual civil action. Knowledge is defense. Act wisely. I didn't sign it. Didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who it came from. The fund dried up overnight. The emergency vote collapsed. And Cheryl? She resigned in disgrace 2 weeks later, citing health reasons. The neighborhood didn't throw her a party. They barely noticed she was gone. There was no parade. No official announcement. No grand speech. Just peace. The county dropped the review investigation for lack of evidence. The harassment suit was quietly settled out of court, a tidy check from Cheryl's personal account, delivered with no apology attached. The HoA board shrank to 3 reluctant members, who spent the next 6 months focused entirely on potholes and landscaping. Nobody talked about the lake anymore. Nobody dared. One golden afternoon, I sat at the end of my dock, feet dangling over the water, a cold beer in hand. The sun danced on the ripples. Birds skimmed the surface. Somewhere across the bay, a dog barked once, happily. It was mine. It had always been mine. And now, finally, it would stay that way. I didn't win because I fought the loudest. I didn't win because I had the best lawyer. I won because I refused to be bullied. Refused to surrender. Refused to let a pack of petty tyrants rewrite reality just because they shouted louder. Some victories don't come with trophies. Some victories are quiet and stubborn and hard-won. And sometimes, they're the sweetest ones of all.